Hey, what's up? It's GC Kinsey, here to talk about my experiences with sharing my pronouns with others and what kinds of things I've learned by doing so. In one of my earlier videos, I talked about how sharing your pronouns when you introduce yourself can help normalize the idea that pronouns aren't always obvious and you can't always tell them by looking at someone. So for this video, I want to dive into my experiences with doing just that and talk about some of the responses that I've observed. A little bit of context, my pronouns are he, him. Prior to transition, they were she, her, and there was a point in the first couple of years of my transition when I was using both sets. And if you want to learn more about how I finally arrived at he, him pronouns, you can check out the video that I am linking right now. So, sharing pronouns. There are two main ways that I do this, and that is online and in person. So I want to start by talking about how that works for me online. When I was still trying to figure out what pronouns were most comfortable for me, there was this growing push to put your pronouns in your social media bio. The idea being that if everyone did this, then trans people wouldn't stick out like a sore thumb when we would say what our pronouns are. But despite being one of those trans people that this was supposed to benefit, I had really mixed feelings about it. First of all, I wasn't sure how to convey the nuance and the context of these two different sets of pronouns I was using in something like a social media bio where you have very limited space. There were times when I wanted to be called he only, there were other times when I was fine with he or she, and that was a lot easier to explain in a conversation. But the bigger issue was that pronouns just felt like very personal information to me at that time. I was 100% comfortable sharing them in a one-on-one interaction, but the thought of putting them on display 24/7 in my bio was a little bit too much for me. However, I didn't want to seem like I was being unsupportive of my own trans community by not addressing pronouns in my bio in any sort of way. And I was also tired of people using they/them pronouns for me, which I have never used and have never been a good fit. But that is, of course, the safest option if you don't know someone's pronouns, so I can't really blame them for that. So my solution to all of this was to update my bio to say, "Ask me about my pronouns." That felt like a good compromise to me, like I wasn't sharing anything that I didn't feel comfortable sharing, but I was still acknowledging the practice of sharing pronouns as a good thing. Unfortunately, this did not work out the way I expected. Most people took "ask me about my pronouns" to mean just use they, them instead of, actually asking me about my pronouns. So I was back at square one. And I was also starting to reach a point where I was much more comfortable with he, him pronouns most of the time, even if I was still okay with she, her on occasion. So I changed my bio again, this time to say he, him, always good, she, her, ask first. This was sort of the most succinct way I could think of to explain my two different sets of pronouns. And even though I knew people probably wouldn't ask first about using she, her, just like they didn't ask me about my pronouns before, I had at least given them he, him as something they could always default to. I kept this in my bio for a pretty good while, but eventually I stopped using she, her pronouns altogether and started using he, him exclusively, at which point I updated my bio one more time, this time to just say he, him. If I'm being completely honest, this decision did feel really weird and pushed me really far outside of my comfort zone. I would rather share that information with people on an individual basis, but I've learned that it's really hard to do that online, and that if I want to be called he, I have to just put it out there because people will not make the effort to ask or check otherwise. Aside from my bio, the other main way that I share my pronouns online is through the lineup posts I make before I go to a convention. So this is just a post that says what costumes I'm going to be wearing on what days, any panels that I'm going to be hosting, and what my pronouns are. This was a lot more useful when I was still going by he and she because I could use the post to give specific context before each event. I haven't gone to any cons since the COVID-19 pandemic began, and that was also the time period when I switched to he, him only, so I'm not sure if I would really need to include my pronouns in these lineup posts going forward or if my bio would be sufficient. I guess we'll find out in a few months or maybe years when it's safe. So that pretty much wraps up my online experience, and now I want to talk about sharing my pronouns in person. And I think for me that's been much more interesting as far as the responses I've gotten. The way I started sharing my pronouns in person, and still do to this day, is with pronoun accessories. My very first one was the custom gold medal I made for my Victor cosplay from Yuri on Ice. And I try to incorporate some sort of pronoun accessory into every cosplay I make. If I can't make something work, then I put a pronoun pin on the lanyard of my con badge. Over the course of 2019, I started gathering a small collection of pronoun badges and pins, and I even made a pronoun t-shirt, which was initially for a cosplay, but I wear it as regular clothes too. And anytime I knew I was going to be around people, I would have on a pronoun accessory of some kind. The biggest thing I learned from this is that people are super unobservant, because wearing pronoun accessories did not stop me from getting misgendered nearly as much as I thought it would. Like, at best it gave me something to point to when I had to correct people. There were a few people who noticed the pronouns I was wearing and used them, but I've also had multiple people call me she when I was wearing a shirt with he, him, his on it in 6-inch letters, so... During 2020, the first year of the pandemic, all of my social interaction moved entirely online, so I didn't have anywhere to wear my pronoun accessories anymore. But once the spring of 2021 rolled around and I got vaccinated, I suddenly realized I was about to start having a lot more interactions in the real world again. Even just going into stores to shop again instead of having everything delivered was going to put me in a situation where I had to talk to a lot of strangers, and I was really not ready for all the misgendering that would come with that, especially after being shielded from it for a whole year. I'm just gonna be real for a second. Anything I may have once had resembling a thick skin for dealing with social dysphoria was long gone after 2020. I knew that I was going to be a lot more sensitive to it and that it was going to hurt a lot more than it did before. And I was freaking out, wondering how I was gonna handle that. So I bought these. These are thin cloth masks that you can wear as a cover over your N95, your KN95, your KF94, whatever you want, and I'm gonna link to the seller's Etsy in the description below. My thinking was that most people are focused on your face when they talk to you, right? So maybe they wouldn't miss my pronouns if they were up here instead of down here. A pronoun mask was something that would have never crossed my mind before the pandemic, but now I had a real opportunity to see if that would work better than a pronoun pin. And I am very pleased to report that it has. I started wearing my pronoun masks out in public in April of 2021, and from then until October, I did not get misgendered once as long as I had it on. We'll talk about October in a minute. But first I want to share some of my observations and experiences with wearing my pronouns on my face. Most importantly, it didn't put a target on my back or anything like that, and I wanted to start out with that because I'm sure there are some of you who are going, why would you do something that so obviously screams, hey, I'm trans? But I'm not trying to minimize my transness in any way or blend in with cis people. I actually prefer it to be visible, and I get dysphoric when it's not recognized. And I'm also fortunate enough to live in a very progressive area where I don't have to worry about my safety from being visibly trans. The only sort of weird thing that happened was one time I went to the grocery store after I'd been swimming, so I was too wet to have a binder on, and someone walked by, looked at my mask, looked down at my chest, looked down at my mask again, and kind of raised an eyebrow, and that just made me laugh. In terms of gendering, here in the South, a typical customer service interaction almost always involves the use of honorifics, aka ma'am or sir, which is one of the reasons I always use self-checkouts if they're available. But the pronoun masks actually helped a lot with that. Cashiers would see it and would choose not to gender me, even if they had used gendered honorifics with all the customers in line ahead of me, so that was pretty great. In the few cases where I guess the cashier felt compelled to call me something, they would use non-gendered words like babe or friend or dear. I once had a cashier who was wearing trans and rainbow flag pride ribbons compliment me on my mask. I don't know if this was a fellow trans person or just an ally, but either way, that was super cool. The kinds of places where the mask was most helpful were at the doctor or the dentist or the hair salon. Those kinds of things where it's a customer service interaction, but it's a more prolonged one than just buying something at a cash register. In those cases, I went in wearing the mask, used that as my way to come out, and it went really well. Everyone was very supportive, and some of them even said having the mask helped them to remember my new pronouns. In situations where I didn't feel like I could safely wear a pronoun mask, I learned the hard way just how much worse indeed my social dysphoria was than before, and the prime example of this was at the gym. I'm a swimmer, and when I started going back to the pool again after I got vaccinated, my first thought was, is it a good idea to wear this pronoun mask if I'm going to have to use a gendered locker room and walk around on the pool deck in a swimsuit that does nothing to hide the shape of my body? And as much as I hated it, I decided not to wear it because I was afraid it was going to cause more trouble than it was worth. But that led to some instances of misgendering from other swimmers and staff members that actually made me cry and left me feeling like I wanted to claw my skin off for days afterward. I told y'all I'm weak sauce now. Fortunately, I did find a gender-neutral changing room hiding in a very non-obvious place because, of course, and so now I do feel safe to wear my pronoun mask to the gym. So overall, things were going pretty great with the mask idea. And then we come to October, when it suddenly just stopped working for some reason. I don't know. Here's all the weird stuff that happened. First, I went to Chicago for a wedding, and during that trip, I had 3 different people misgender me even when I was wearing a pronoun mask. And like I said earlier, I'd been wearing these for 6 months without getting misgendered once, so that threw me for a loop. But what really got me was people's reactions when I pointed to the pronouns on my literal face and corrected them. One of them did not acknowledge the correction at all, as if they just didn't hear me. Another one gave me a weird look and said, "Really?" The last one proceeded to misgender me 2 more times after the first correction, did not apologize or rephrase, and when I explained how hurtful and disrespectful that was, just said, "Hey, I didn't know." What do you mean you didn't know? It was on my face. So I barely had time to process all of that before my second trip, this time to Las Vegas for Skate America. And yet again, first day there, I got misgendered by 8 different people when I had on a pronoun mask, only one of whom even acknowledged my correction. That one was a Lyft driver who, in all fairness, maybe couldn't see the mask because it was dark, and because they apologized and switched to the correct pronouns from then on and were super cool about it, I tipped them extra. But the rest of those people, it was literally just blank stares. One of them even pointedly looked over my shoulder and started a conversation with the person in line behind me, which I thought was pretty shady. So that much dysphoria in a very short time left me crying in the shower and worried that I was not going to be able to enjoy the rest of my trip. Fortunately, there was a silver lining to all of this, because in spite of this massive influx of misgendering and my pronoun mask no longer working in Las Vegas for some reason, I did have one thing happen while I was wearing it that was super cool, powerful enough to get rid of all that dysphoria from the first day, and I actually filmed my reaction and put it in an Instagram reel. Oh my god, y'all. I am here in Vegas for Skate America, and I had to make this video because something really awesome just happened to me that has never happened before. So I just went, picked up my dinner, my pizza, and the cashier checked me out, saw this, and said, "Have a good day, sir." Ah! That has never happened to me in my life. I am so ecstatic right now. I'm so full of gender euphoria, I can't even put it into words. Usually when people see my pronoun mask, they kind of opt not to gender me at all, which is fine. Some people ignore it and misgender me, which is gross. But this person actually saw my pronouns and called me sir, and I have never been so happy. And to top it all off, when I was coming off of the elevator to go back to my room to eat my pizza, I happened to pass by French figure skater Adam Xiaohemfa, and I gave him the bro nod and he did it back. So best day ever. So yeah, that was amazing. And I was floating on the high of that gender euphoria not only for the rest of my trip, but for the whole next couple of weeks, which just goes to show how powerful gender euphoria can be and why it's so important. Since those 2 trips, everything has gone back to normal with the pronoun mask, with a couple of small exceptions. I've had one receptionist at the gym misgender me multiple times, even with the mask on, and again respond to my corrections with a blank stare. What are you gonna do? And when I got my post-Vegas COVID test, one of the lab techs was like, "What does your mask mean?" And I said, "It's my pronouns." And when the lab tech still didn't quite understand, another lab tech nearby said, "It's her pronouns. I mean, it's his pronouns. Shoot, sorry." And that made me laugh. And it was also really refreshing just to see someone actually realize their mistake and catch themselves in the moment. I want to wrap up this video with my big takeaways from sharing my pronouns both online and in person for the last 3+ years, which has sort of been like one big social experiment. Number 1, I tend to get gendered correctly a lot more often online than I do in person. Not 100% in either case, obviously, but online it is significantly better. And I can only guess that this is because I have my pronouns in my bio so people can check that before they post. Number 2, out of all the different pronoun accessories I've tried, the masks have been by far the most effective. Not completely foolproof, obviously, especially when I'm traveling apparently, but they still work much better than pins or badges or shirts or anything else. I do think those first 6 months where they were foolproof kind of spoiled me a little bit. Overall, I attribute their effectiveness to the position on my face, which, as I had guessed, makes them a lot harder to miss. And number 3, a lot of people apparently just straight up do not acknowledge corrections after they've misgendered someone, which I think was the thing that surprised me the most. And I don't know if I get blank stares in response to that because people are transphobic or rude or confused, or maybe they just feel awkward and don't know what to say. It could be some or all of the above. But I do want to give a big shout out to the ones who did acknowledge my corrections, or who even caught and corrected themselves, because that is such a true sign of respect, and it makes such a huge difference to folks like me. I don't know what else the future might bring when it comes to sharing my pronouns with other people, especially the further along I get into my transition. But after the way things have gone so far, I'm really intrigued and excited to find out. I mean, who knows, maybe my pronoun mask or pin or shirt will get someone else to call me sir. Before I go, I'd like to invite all of you to talk about your own experiences with sharing pronouns. How do you communicate your pronouns to others? How do they respond? Do you have any advice about pronoun sharing that might help someone else? Please feel free to drop your comments below and let's get a discussion going. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I've got more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person. I have cosplay music videos, makeup tutorials, voice recordings of me singing before I start testosterone. So stick around and like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching and for coming on this pronoun journey with me. I hope you learned a lot of new things. I really appreciate your support, and I will see you on the next one.